بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك وعظيم سلطانك. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد عبدك ورسولك والنبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا طيبا وعملا متقبلا. Welcome to our lesson 10 on Irshad Tullab al-Haqaiq, understanding Hadith science through the work of Imam Nawawi's Irshad Tullab al-Haqaiq. Inshallah, today we will cover the 12th and 13th category, Tadlis and Shadh. Tadlis and Shadh, the camouflaging report and the anomalous report. The course outcomes are as follows: to understand the foundational categories and reliability of the Sunnah, to recognize the nuances of Hadith terminology and their contextual subtleties, to learn the process and requirements of Hadith for Hadith authentication, and to grasp the dynamics of Hadith transmission and chain evaluation. Today's lesson outcomes are as follows. We will explore the definition of Tadlis and its two categories. And then a third category is also mentioned in the footnote. So the two main categories will be mentioned. So then we will distinguish between the Tadlis al-Isnad and Tadlis al-Shuyukh, including their causes, motivations, rulings and examples. And then we'll go on to the next category, the Shadh, and we'll understand the concept and the definition of the Shadh Hadith and how major scholars define and assess it. So the key concepts: Tadlis al-Isnad, hiding a missing link using vague terms. Tadlis al-Shuyukh, hiding a teacher's identity, true identity, by changing their name and using another type of feature. And Shadh, a trustworthy narrator contradicting stronger transmitters. So this is the 12th category, النوع الثاني عشر, معرفة التدليس. معرفة التدليس, the category of understanding Tadlis. The category of understanding Tadlis. So going back to the text, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال المصنف رحمه الله: النوع الثاني عشر, the 12th category, معرفة التدليس. معرفة التدليس, knowing Tadlis. دلس يدلس. Tadlis means إخفاء العيب والتمويه, to hide a defect and to falsify it, misrepresent it, camouflage it. This is دلس يدلس تدليس, to camouflage, to falsify, to misrepresent. In the context here, Tadlis means إخفاء العيب في الإسناد والتحسين لظاهره, to hide a defect and camouflage a defect in the sanad, in the chain, and to outwardly represent it, and adorn it and beautify it. This is the technical definition, simple technical definition. إخفاء العيب في الإسناد, to camouflage, to hide an aib in the sanad, in the chain, and to وَالتَّحْسِينُ لِظَاهِرِهِ, and to adorn and beautify it outwardly. So Musannif rahimahullah, he says, التدليس قسمان. Tadlis is of two types. Tadlis, camouflaging, concealing, is of two types. أحدهما تدليس الإسناد. The first is تدليس الإسناد, the camouflaging taking place in the chain, in the sanad. He says وهو أن يروي عمن لقيه أو عاصره ما لم يسمعه منه موهما أنه سمعه منه ولا يقول في ذلك حدثنا ولا أخبرنا وما أشبههما. So it is when Tadlis al-Isnad takes place, when a narrator narrates a hadith, reports a hadith, عمن لقيه, from someone whom he has met. So this narrator, he has met this person, one, أو عاصره, or he is a contemporary, he's a mu'asir of his, he is a contemporary of his, ما لم يسمع منه, but he narrates which he has not done direct hearing from. He has not heard him directly say it. ما لم يسمع منه, he narrates a hadith which he has not heard from him. He has not done sama of this hadith from him. However, though he is a mu'asir of his, he is a contemporary of his, he has met him, but this particular hadith, he has not heard it from him. He has not done sama from him. موهما أنه سمع منه. He suggests and he gives an impression. موهما, he gives an impression and he gives a suggestion. The way he suggests and he reports the hadith, that he has heard it from him, that the sama has took from him, that sama has took place from him. ولا يقول في ذلك, but however he does not say حدثنا, or neither he says أخبرنا. وما أشبههما, and likewise besides these two there are other words that show ittisal, connection, and sama, audition, direct hearing. بل يقول, in fact he says قال فلان, he says so and so said, or he uses the word عن فلان, from so and so, ونحو ذلك, and likewise other words. ثم قد يكون بينهما واحد وقد يكون أكثر. Sometimes there is between the two, there is one person like this, or there could be more than one. There could be more than one. ثم قد يكون بينهما واحد وقد يكون أكثر. Then sometimes there could be only one person that he has done this from, or there could be more than one. قلت. So let us go to the presentation and see what we can explore through the slides. First, let us look where have we reached. We have reached Tadlis. Which is the 12th category from the Anwa al-Hadith. Then we will also cover the 13th category, which is Shadh, the anomalous report. So Anwa al-Da'if, the types of Da'if are two. الضعيف بسبب سقط في الإسناد. We have covered the Da'if category due to omission taking place in the sanad. We've just covered that in the previous weeks. Today, inshallah, we will cover سقط خفي, the Da'if category due to omission in the sanad. However, this omission is a subtle omission. It is a subtle form of disconnection. It is a subtle form of disconnection and subtle form of inqita' taking place. So the first category is al-mudallas, tadlis. The second is al-mursal al-khafi. So the saqt, the omission and the disconnection, inqita' that is taking place in the sanad, it is a saqt khafi. It is a subtle form of disconnection taking place. So tadlis, and then you have al-mursal al-khafi. And the second type of da'if is when the بسبب طعن في الراوي, it is due to defamation and found in a rawi. And there are various types. So طعن في الراوي, there are two types. طعن في العدالة, when the defamation is in the integrity of the rawi, or the ta'an is due to the dabt, the retention and the preciseness and accurateness of the rawi in taking the words, in memorizing the words, in narrating the words. So if it's ta'an fil adala, it could either be due to the rawi being a liar, or it could be due to him being accused of lying. If it's the first, if it's the former, then it's called mawdu, fabricated, and if it's the latter, it is called matruk, the abandoned. Then you have ta'an fil dhabt, the defamation due to dhabt, and this is we can go on to ta'an fil dhabt. So ta'an fil dhabt are many types. So الضعيف بسبب طعن في الراوي, the ضعيف, the weak, due to ta'an found in the narrator is due to either it being found in the adala, in the integrity of the rawi, or it could be due to in the dhabt. If it's due to dhabt, then it is of 10 types. And one of them is Shadh, which we will cover today, the anomalous report. So النوع الثاني عشر معرفة التدليس. We have just started the text. So tadlis is of two types: tadlis al-isnad and tadlis al-shuyukh. Tadlis camouflaging and concealing taking place in the sanad, or tadlis camouflaging and concealing taking place found in the shuyukh, in the teachers. So the first type, concealment, tadlis in the chain. So this occurs when a narrator transmits from someone he met or he lived in the same era. He met, laqiyahu, or he lived in the same era, asarahu. However, he narrates with something he never directly heard from him. The sama did not take place. Yet he creates the impression, muhiman, he creates the impression of direct hearing, of direct sama taking place. However, what he does is he avoids explicit terms such as haddathana or akhbarana, and instead he says qala fulanun or an fulanin and similar expressions. So then he says that between the two, between the two may lie one narrator, or it could be several narrators. So going back to the text, قلت, Imam Nawawi says, he adds a note from him. He says, وقد قال الخطيب, Khatib Baghdadi rahimahullah, he says, وربما لم يسقط المدلس الشيخه. وربما لم يسقط المدلس شيخه. Sometimes the mudallis, the camouflager, he does not omit and drop his sheikh, his teacher. What he does is لكن يسقط ممن بعده رجلا ضعيفا أو صغير السن. However, he might omit someone who is after the sheikh of the sheikh, or someone thereafter. And this person could be either weak, this narrator could be either weak, أو صغير السن, or he could be a junior, a young in age. Why does he do this? ليحسن الحديث بذلك, in order to beautify the hadith because of this. So this way the entire sanad and the entire chain will apparently seem that it has no weak narrators, or it has all narrators, senior narrators. So he omits a weak narrator, or he drops and omits a صغير السن, a junior in age. وكان الأعمش والثوري وبقية يفعلون هذا النوع. He says that Amash and Thawri, Sufyan al-Thawri, وبقية ibn al-Walid, they used to carry out this type of operation. They used to carry out this type of action by example, by omitting not the sheikh but the sheikh of the sheikh due to the person being weak or the person being young in age. So going back to the representation, he says there are few forms of tadlis taking place. So Imam Nawawi says that the narrator may not drop his own sheikh, his own teacher, but he might instead omit a weak rajul da'if or a young transmitter, saghir al-sin, who comes after the sheikh in the chain. So why does he do this? Seeking thereby to beautify the hadith. So the following Amash, Thawri, Sufyan al-Thawri, Baqi ibn al-Walid and others, they were known to engage in this type of action. They were well known to be doing this type of action. So going back to the text, he says that this type of tadlis is called tadlis taswiyah. Shaykh Nur Itar in the footnote, he says وَيُسَمَّى تَدْلِيسُ التَّسْوِيَةِ. This type is called tadlis taswiyah, camouflaging due to making everyone apparently seem equal. So وَيُسَمَّى تَدْلِيسُ التَّسْوِيَةِ. This form of tadlis camouflaging is called tadlis taswiyah. Then he defines it, looking the footnote, وَهُوَ أَنْ يَرْوِيَ الْمُدَلِّسُ حَدِيثًا. It is when a mudallis, a camouflager, he narrates a hadith بِسَنَدٍ فِيهِ ضَعِيفٌ. He narrates a hadith with a sanad that has a weak narrator. بَيْنَ ثِقَتَيْن. Between two trustworthy and reliable narrators. So in other words, there is a weak narrator, ضعيف narrator, between two ثقتين, between two reliable narrators. And this narrator, what he does, this camouflager, what he does, he omits the ضعيف between these two reliable narrators. لقي أحدهما الآخر. These two have met each other. فيسقط الضعيف. So what the camouflager does, he omits the ضعيف narrator. ويجعل بين الثقتين عبارة موهمة للاتصال. And he places between the two reliable narrators an expression that seems so that there is somewhat connection. And there is no connection between the two thiqa. But however, he mentions a word in between, seeming so that there is a somewhat connection between the two. So فَيَسْتَوِي الْإِسْنَادُ كُلُّهُ ثِقَات. So this way, the entire isnad will now have full reliable narrators, because he has omitted the da'if narrator. So فَيَسْتَوِي الْإِسْنَادُ كُلُّهُ ثِقَاتٍ. So the entire isnad, the entire chain, now will be equally full of thiqat, reliable narrators. لِمَنْ لَمْ يَخْبُرْ هَذَا الشَّان. So for someone who has no skill, he will not be aware, who is not aware of this, he will come to know this. لِمَنْ لَمْ يَخْبُرْ هَذَا الشَّان. For someone who is not aware of this situation taking place. So وَهَذَا شَرُ أَقْسَامِ التَّدْلِيس. This is the worst of the types of tadlis. When a mudallis, camouflager, he omits a da'if narrator in between the two thiqa, trustworthy narrators. وَسَمَّاهُ الْقُدَمَاءُ تَجْوِيدًا. The earlier scholars, qudama, they have named this type of tadlis tajweed. What does tajweed mean here? In this context, jawwada yujawwid means to beautify, to adorn, to become better, to be skillful. So he does this, like he mentions the word in ulum al-hadith, لأنه ذكر فيه من فيه الأجود وحذف غيرهم. Because here the mudallis, he has mentioned all the ajwad narrators, the better narrators, the thiqat narrators, trustworthy narrators, and he has omitted the others. He has omitted any other weak narrators. So this type of tadlis is called tadlisut tajweed too as well. So this is also called tadlisut tajweed. So this is the definition of Tadlis al-Taswiyah. Tadlis al-Taswiyah, or you can call it Tadlis al-Tajweed. So this was in the footnote. This was in the footnote. Now going back to the text, the actual text above, al-Qism al-Thani, the second type. The second type. Tadlis al-Shuyukh. Tadlis, camouflaging of the Shuyukh. Concealment of the Shuyukh, teachers. وهو أن يروي عن شيخ حديثا سمعه فيسميه أو يكنيه أو ينسبه أو يصفه بما لا يعرف كي لا يعرف. So it is when a narrator, he narrates a hadith from his shaykh, أن يروي عن شيخ حديثا. He doesn't omit the shaykh. He narrates the hadith from the shaykh. سمعه, that he had heard from him. He heard the hadith directly from him. So sama took place from the shaykh. However, he names his teacher. فيسميه أو يكنيه, or he gives him a kunya, he gives him an agnomen, أو ينسبه, or he gives him an ascription, أو يصفه, or he describes him, بما لا يعرف, with an attribute, with a characteristic which is not known, with an unknown characteristic. كي لا يعرف, in order for him to be, in order that he is not known. So كي لا يعرف. So however, he is who he is, but however, the narrator, what he does, he conceals his identity. He conceals his characteristic through naming him in other ways. So example, أما القسم الأول. So then he says, أما القسم الأول فمكروه جدا ذمه أكثر علماء. As for the first type, فمكروه جدا, it is severely disliked. And ذمه أكثر علماء. And the majority of the scholars have criticized it. وكان شعبة من أشدهم ذما له. And Shu'bah bin Hajjaj, the famous Shu'bah bin Hajjaj, he was the most who criticized this type of tadlis. So going back to the presentation, let us look into the definition of Tadlis al-Shuyukh. وهو أن يروي عن شيخ حديثا سمع منه. So the hadith has been narrated from the shaykh. يروي عن شيخ حديثا سمع منه. However, what he does is he disguises the teacher. So he has truly heard from the teacher, but he disguises his name by changing his name, using a nickname, attributing him to an unusual lineage. ينسبه, he gives him an unusual lineage, or يصفه, he describes him unusually, or describe him with something by which he is not normally known, so that he is not recognized. كي لا يعرف, so that he is not recognized. So this is why he does this. So what is the hukam of the first? The hukam of the first min tadlis al-isnad is that it is highly reprehensible. It is فَمَكْرُوهٌ جِدًّا. It is highly reprehensible. So the first category is viewed as severely blameworthy, مَكْرُوهٌ جِدًّا. So there has been strong condemnation by scholars like Shu'bah and so on. Most scholars denounce this practice, and Shu'bah bin al-Hajjaj, he was particularly harsh in his criticism. So going back to the text, he says, ثم اختلفوا في قبول رواية من عرف بهذا التدليس. There is difference of opinion amongst the scholars of hadith regarding the acceptance of a riwayah from a person who is known to practice tadlis in this way. في قبول رواية من عرف بهذا التدليس. So one group of scholars فجعله فريق من أهل الحديث والفقهاء مجروحا. So a group of the muhaddithin, from the scholars of the hadith and fuqaha jurists, they say that this is the narrator will be majruh. The narrator will be discredited by doing this. He will be considered to be majruh. وقالوا, and they have said, لا تقبل روايته بين السماع أو لم يبين. his riwayah will not be accepted. His riwayah will not be accepted. Whether he later he explains and he clarifies the sama taking place or not. Bayyan as-sama' aw lam yubayyin. Whether eventually he does clarify the sama taking place or he does not. His riwayah will not be accepted. This is the opinion of a group of scholars from the Hadith and fuqaha jurists. وَالصَّحِيحُ التَّفْصِيلُ. But the correct opinion is there is some detail in this. There is some detail. So he goes into the detail. He says, وَالصَّحِيحُ التَّفْصِيلُ في التفصيل فما رواه بلفظ محتمل لم يبين فيه السماع فحكمه حكم المرسل وأنواعه. So any hadith that has been narrated with a vague word بلفظ محتمل, with a word that is ambiguous, that is vague, yeah? Any hadith that is narrated with a vague word لفظ محتمل لم يبين فيه السماع, and sama has not been clarified. لم يبين فيه السماع, whether sama took place or did not take place, this has not been clarified. And this hadith is reported with a lafz muhtamal, vague word. So then the hukam of this hadith is that it will have the hukam of mursal وأنواعه and its types. وما رواه بلفظ مبين للاتصال كسمعت وأخبرنا وحدثنا وأشباهها فهو مقبول محتج به. And any hadith that has been narrated with a word that clarifies the connection, one can verify, it can be verified, it can be understood that ittisal, connection, did take place. Like he uses the word sami'tu or akhbarana or haddathana, and likewise other words. Then in this case the hadith will be accepted muhtajun bihi, and also it will be, one can seek hujjah from it. Muhtajun bihi, one can seek hujjah from it. Then he says وفي الصحيحين وغيرهما من الكتب المعتمدة من حديث هذا الضرب كثير جدا كقتادة والأعمش والسفيانين وهشيم وغيرهم. Then he says that in the Sahihain and other works, the two famous authentic, rigorous authentic works and others from the reliable and authoritative books, yeah, these type of hadiths are many. These type of hadiths can be found in abundance, like Qatada, Amash, Sufyanain meaning Sufyan al-Thawri and Sufyan ibn Uyayna and Hushaym, and likewise. So وهذا, the case is because the reason is لأن التدليس ليس كذبا. Tadlis is not outright lying. Tadlis in this case is not outright lying. But what it is it gives the possibility of sama' due to the person using a word that gives the possibility and an impression of sama'. This is why it is called tadlis. It is called tadlis. وهذا لأن التدليس ليس كذبا. ثم الحكم بأنه لا يقبل من المدلس حتى يبين أجراه الشافعي في من عرفناه دلس مرة والله أعلم. Then ending slightly the discussion, he says then the hukm is بأنه لا يقبل من المدلس, that the hadith will not be accepted from a mudallis. بأنه لا يقبل من المدلس, it will not be accepted from the camouflager حتى يبين, until the camouflager, until the mudallis, he clarifies sama. Then he says أجراه الشافعي, Imam Shafi has applied this also regarding a person whom we have come to know that he has done tadlis, camouflaging, even once. So if a person has done camouflaging even once, so in that case his hadith will not be accepted until sama takes place. This is, Imam Shafi also says this. Wallahu a'lam. So let us look into the footnote of this discussion. He says, Shaykh Nurul Itar rahimahullah, he says, أي فلا يجوز جرح المدلس. So therefore it is not permissible to discredit the mudallis. It is not permissible to discredit the mudallis. بل يراعى فيه الاحتياط. So one should exercise caution in this matter. فلا يقبل منه إلا ما رواه بصيغة تفيد الاتصال. So one will not accept from this person, from this mudallis, except what he has narrated with a word that gives the possibility, that only gives the impression of ittisal, that only suggests, that only gives benefit of ittisal connection. So only this type of hadith will be narrated from him. كسمعت وأخبرنا. وإن روي بصيغة موهمة مثل عن أو قال فلان يعتبر في حكم المنقطع. And if this person he narrates a hadith with a صيغة محتملة, with a صيغة موهمة, with a صيغة موهمة, a vague word, like عن and قال فلان, these are vague expressions, then in that case, then the hadith will be considered to be having the ruling of منقطع, انقطاع, disconnection. لاحتمال كونه دلس فيه, because there is a possibility that this person has done some form of tadlis in it, camouflaging in it. So وهذا هو الذي عليه جمهور أئمة الحديث والفقه والأصول. So Shaykh Nur rahimahullah, he says that the settled opinion of the majority of the Imams of Hadith and Fuqaha is this. وهذا هو الذي عليه جمهور أئمة الحديث والفقه والأصول كما قال علي في جامع التحصيل. And also mentioned in his other works. One should look into the following works also as well. So going back to the presentation, let us summarize what we have just discussed. So the legal and ethical judgments on Tadlis al-Isnad. So disagreement on accepting such narrators. واختلفوا ثم اختلفوا في قبول رواية من عرف بهذا التدليس. So scholars differed on whether the narrations of someone known for this practice should be accepted or not. So the position of one group of scholars, i.e. the من أهل الحديث والفقهاء, is that a group of hadith scholars and jurists consider the narrator discredited, majruh, and rejecting his narrations, whether or not he explicitly states that he heard the hadith or not. لا بين السماع أو لم يبين. However, there is detail. Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, he says there is some detail. The detail is the sound opinion, and the sahih opinion is one of differentiation. So if the narrator uses ambiguous expression, loves muhtamal, vague words, without clarifying, and لم يبين فيه السماع, then the hadith will take the ruling of mursal and its categories. فحكمه حكم المرسل وأنواعه. And if he uses explicit terms of connection, بلفظ مبين للاتصال, words that clarify, مبين للاتصال, words that clarify connection, like I heard, سمعت, he informed us, وحدثنا, he narrated to us. So then the report will be accepted. For مقبول, and also it will be authoritative, meaning it will be, one can seek proof from it. مقبول محتج به. So then he talks about the tadlis of mudallisin in the sahihain. Why are they ahadith of mudallisin in the sahihain and others? So the Sahih and other authoritative collections, they contain many narrations of this kind. From narrators like Qatada, Amash, the two Sufyan ibn Uyayna, Sufyan ibn Thawri, Hushaym and others. Because in actual fact, Tadlis is not lying. Imam Shafi, he held the view that we do not accept the narration of a mudallis unless he clarifies hearing. Even if he was to have done this practice of Tadlis once. So أجراه الشافعي في من عرفناه دلس مرة. So if he was to do Tadlis even once, his hadith will not be accepted unless sama, he clarifies his sama and hearing. So what is the hukam? What is the hukam of these type of Tadlis He says, Imam Nawawi rahimahullah says, going back to the text, قلت ما كان في الصحيحين وغيرهما من الكتب الصحيحة عن المدلسين بعن محمول على ثبوت سماعه من جهة أخرى والله أعلم. So also this was mentioned before. Imam Nawawi says, I say that all those ahadith that can be found in the Sahihain, the two rigorously authentic works, and others from the authentic works from the Mudallisin, using the vague term an, i.e. the mu'an'an hadith, then mahmulun ala thubuti sama'hi, then they will be deemed and understood to be proven of being heard directly, ala thubuti sama'hi, min jihatin ukhra, in other ways, in other chains, in other ahadith. Wallahu a'lam. So going back to the presentation, so the compilers, how did they judge the an'ana in the sihah, in the sahih works, the sahihain? So Imam Nawawi says, when the sahihain narrate from a mudallis using the formula, the pattern, the word, expression an, then it is understood that hearing, sama, has been verified. And how has it been verified? Through other means, min jihatin ukhra, through other isnad, through other ahadith. Going back to the text, he says, وَأَمَّا الْقِسْمُ الثَّانِي, as for the second type is Tadlis al-Shuyukh, meaning when concealing of identity is done by changing the name of the Shaykh, or giving a different type of attribute and characteristic. So he says, وَأَمَّا الْقِسْمُ الثَّانِي, as for the second type, فَأَمْرُهُ أَخَفْ, the matter and the ruling regarding this second type is less offensive. It is less offensive. فَأَمْرُهُ أَخَفُّ. However, وَفِيهِ تَضْيِيعٌ لِلْمَرْوِي عَنْهُ وَتَوْعِيرٌ لِطَرِيقِ مَعْرِفَةِ حَالِهِ. Two things can be found in this type of camouflaging and tadlis. What happens is, one is doing tadyi' of the marwi anhu. Dayya yudayyu tadyi' means, here in this case, one is undermining the actual narrator. One is losing the narrator, meaning one is undermining the narrator by doing this. He's not mentioning his actual name, but he's mentioning him with an unknown name, or unknown lineage, or unknown characteristic, and so on. So وَفِيهِ تَضْيِيعٌ لِلْمَرْوِ عَنْهُ. So in this case, in this type of tadlis, there is somewhat undermining of the marwi anhu, of the teacher, of the person that whom one is narrating from. وَتَوْعِيرٌ لِطَرِيقِ مَعْرِفَةِ أَهْلِهِ. One is making it difficult to know the state of the person. To know this, if the person is camouflaged with another identity, then it will make it difficult to know the state of the person, the state of the person. So he says, وَتَوْعِيرٌ لِطَرِيقِ مَعْرِفَةِ أَهْلِهِ. And it is in this way, by doing this, one is making it difficult to know the path of knowing, لِطَرِيقِ مَعْرِفَةِ, know the path of narrating of knowing the narrator, of knowing the مَعْرِفَةِ حال rawi. One is making it difficult to know the path of the state of the rawi, the situation of the rawi. So, however, then he says, وَيَخْتَلِفُ الْحَالُ فِي كَرَاهَتِهِ بِحَسَبِ الْغَرَضِ الْحَامِلِ عَلَيْهِ. Then he concludes the paragraph and the discussion. So what is the reason for dislikeness? So وَيَخْتَلِفُ الْحَالُ فِي كَرَاهَتِهِ بِحَسَبِ الْغَرَضِ الْحَامِلِ عَنْهُ. And the reason for the dislikeness of doing this differs depending on the reasons, بحسب الغرض, depending on the reasons that motivate the narrator. There are various reasons of the narrator doing this. The various reasons the mudallis does this, the camouflager does this. There are various reasons and factors that motivate him to do this. He mentions the first one. He says, فَقَدْ يَحْمِلُهُ كَوْنُ شَيْخِهِ الَّذِي غَيَّرَ سِمَتَهُ غَيْرُ ثِقَةٍ. That sometimes he is motivated, the person, the mudallis, he is motivated to do this because the Shaykh, whose sima, whose identity has been changed, he is not thiqah, he is not a trustworthy person. So because he's not a trustworthy person, he's not from the category of the thiqat, so what he does is he changes his identity with another characteristic. أو أصغر من الراوي عنه, or he's younger than the person whom he's narrating from. He's younger than the rawi. He's younger than the rawi. He's junior than the rawi. أو متأخر الوفاة. Third is that this teacher, this person, he has died later. He has died later. The Shaykh has had a longer life. The Shaykh has had a longer life. He's متأخر الوفاة. He's متأخر الوفاة, meaning he has died later. He has had a longer life, and also because of this, قد شاركه في السماع منه جماعة دونه. Many a group of scholars, a group of narrators have heard from him, have done sama from him. They share sama from him. Besides this narrator, what this mudallis wants to do is, because there are many others, he wants to conceal his identity, because there are many others, and also he wants to be unique in his narration. So what he does is he conceals the narration, the identity, the sama, the hal of the narrator due to this. أو متأخر الوفاة قد شاركوا في السماع منه جماعة دونه. Or this narrator, the Shaykh, he's had a longer life, and because he's had a longer life, قد شاركوا في السماع منه, many a group of scholars, a group of narrators have shared, having heard directly from him, دونه, beside this person, beside this mudallis. So this is why what he does is he omits him. He camouflages him. Not omits him, he camouflages him. أو كونه كثير الرواية عنه. Or the teacher, he has a lot of narrations. So فلا يحب تكرار الشخص على صورة واحدة. So he does not like to repeat the same person again. He wants to sound good. So he does not like to repeat the personality, this person, in one way. So these are the four factors that motivates a person to camouflage the identity, the characteristic of the narrator. So وتسمح بهذا القسم الخطيب أبو بكر وغيره من المصنفين. So Imam Nawawi says that Khatib Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he has been lenient and permitting of this type. Khatib Abu Bakr and other scholars have been permitting and lenient regarding this type of action. Wallahu a'lam. So going back to the presentation, he says the ruling of Tadlis al-Shuyukh, the ruling of the second category, Tadlis al-Shuyukh. So it is less severe. Amruhu akhaf. It is somewhat undermining the one being narrated from. However, what is happening here is that the narrator, the mudallis, is undermining the person, the one who is being narrated from, by doing this. Or also what he is doing is he's making it difficult to know this rawi's exact status and situation, hal. So this type, and then he mentioned the four factors that motivate a narrator, mudallis, to do this. So Imam Khatib al-Baghdadi, Khatib Abu Bakr, and other scholars, they were lenient with this category. So this ends our discussion on Tadlisush and Tadlis, Ma'rifatul Tadlis, the 12th category. Now the 13th category, النوع الثالث عشر معرفة الشاذ. He says قال الشافعي رحمه الله, Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, he says ليس الشاذ أن يروي الثقة ما لا يروي غيره إنما الشاذ أن يروي الثقة حديثا يخالف ما روى الناس. So Imam Shafi'i defines shadh is, he says that shadh is not when a trustworthy, reliable narrator narrates a hadith which has been not narrated by others, which has not been narrated by others. This is not shadh. ليس الشاذ أن يروي الثقة ما لا يروي غيره, which has not been narrated by another. This is not the definition of shadh. Shadh is when a reliable narrator narrates a hadith and he disagrees, he contradicts, he opposes others who have narrated it. يخالف ما روى الناس. إنما الشاذ أن يروي الثقة حديثا. It is when a reliable narrator narrates a hadith and he opposes and contradicts others who have narrated it. يخالف ما روى الناس. Then he says وحكى الحافظ أبو يعلى الخليلي نحو هذا عن الشافعي وجماعة من أهل الحجاز. ثم قال الذي عليه الحفاظ الحديث أن الشاذ ما ليس له إلا إسناد واحد يشذ به شيخ ثقة كان أو غير ثقة. He says that Hafiz Abu Ya'la al-Khalili, he has also narrated and quoted likewise from Imam Shafi and a group of scholars of Hijaz, from the scholars of Hijaz. Then he says ثم قال الذي عليه حفاظ الحديث. According to the Huffaz al-Hadith, Shadh is when Shadh takes place. The definition of Shadh is when ما ليس له إلا إسناد واحد. Shadh is a hadith which has only one sanad, one chain. Shadh is the anomalous report is that has one chain. يشذ به shaykh, and a single shaykh, he alone narrates it. So it has only one chain and a single sole narrator narrates it. A single sole narrator narrates the hadith. Whether this single sole narrator, he is thiqa or not, whether he's reliable or unreliable, he is considered to be thiqa or غير thiqa. فما كان عن غير ثقة فمتروك. So if he is not thiqa, if he is not trustworthy or reliable, then in that case the hadith will be classified as matruk, abandoned. وما كان عن ثقة, and if the hadith is narrated by a thiqa, then يتوقف فيه, then it will be متوقف فيه. One will pause, one will look deeper into and explore and investigate. ولا يحتج به, and one will not seek hujjah and evidence from it. ولا يحتج به. وقال الحاكم, Imam Hakim, he says, he further defines the definition of shadh. الشاذ من فرد به ثقة. Shadh is when a reliable narrator solely narrates a hadith. الشاذ من فرد به ثقة. It is when a reliable narrator, trustworthy narrator, singly, he narrates the hadith. وليس له أصل بمتابع, and this hadith does not have a basis of a corroborating hadith narrator. وليس له أصل. So it is only narrated by a thiqa person. It is only narrated, and there is no other person who has narrated this hadith. There is no basis of a mutabi'. There is no foundation or basis of a corroborating narrator. So it is only this person narrating the hadith. So like he says, Shaykh Nur Itar, he says, the meaning of وَلَيْسَ لَهُ أَصْلٌ بِمُتَابِعٍ means, number 3 footnote, أي لا يرويه غيره. There is no one beside this thiqa narrator narrating the hadith. There is no one beside this thiqa narrator narrating the hadith. So going back to the presentation, النوع الثالث عشر, the 13th category, معرفة الشاذ, understanding shadh. شذ يشذ, to be rare, to be separate. So the anomalous report. So Imam Shafi defines shadh as a trustworthy narrator reporting alone. This is not shadh. A trustworthy narrator reporting a hadith alone, this is not shadh. Shadh is when a trustworthy narrator أن يروي الثقة حديثا, يخالف ما روى الناس, that contradicts and opposes the reliable majority. The reliable majority. يخالف ما روى الناس. So the criterion is, it is not the contradiction. The criterion is contradiction, sorry. The criterion is the contradiction, the mukhalafa. It is not the singularity. Singularity, tafarrud, narrating hadith fardan, does not make the hadith shadh. It is the contradiction that makes the hadith shadh. This is the summary. So the criterion is the mukhalafa. The criterion is the mukhalafa. If there is mukhalafa, yukhalifu ma rawa an-nas, then the hadith will be considered to be shadh, but not the singularity. So then he quotes Khalili and all the other Huffaz. He says, Khalili cited Imam Shafi also, and the view of other Hijazi scholars is that Hadith master defines Shadh a report with one chain. A report with one chain. And the Shadh ma laysa lahu illa isnadun wahidun. And it applies to sole trustworthy and untrustworthy narrators. يشذ به الشيخ ثقة كان أو غير ثقة. So if the lone narrator is unreliable, then the report will be rejected. Will be فما كان عن غير ثقة. Then in that case, the report will be matruk, rejected. And if he is trustworthy, then the report is withheld. Is mutawaqqaf fihi. One will pause. One will and not use as evidence. ولا يحتج به. So Hakim's definition is what? الشاذ من فرض به ثقة وليس له أصل بمتابعين. That the shadh is what a trustworthy narrator transmits alone, without any supporting narrator, without a mutabi', without having a basis. وليس له أصل means without this hadith having a basis of any supporting narrator, mutabi'. Shaykh Nur has said وليس له أصل بمتابع means أي لا يرويه غيره. There is no other narrator narrating this hadith. So going back to the text, قال الشيخ رحمه الله, Hafiz ibn Salah رحمه الله, he says, أما ما حكم الشافعي بشذوذه. He's quoting, Imam Nawawi is quoting the actual text of Muqaddimah ibn Salah, i.e. the words of Hafiz ibn Salah. There is the particle mawsula, the ma mawsula, I think it has been omitted here. So amma ma hakam al-Shafi'i, you can add ma here. Amma ma hakam al-Shafi'i, as for what Imam Shafi has defined, as for what Imam Shafi has, the way Imam Shafi has defined shadh. If one looks at the definition of Imam Shafi and his definition of shadh, amma ma hakam al-Shafi'i bishududhihi, as for the definition which Imam Shafi has ruled and defined, bishududhihi, of a hadith being shadh, fala ishkala fihi, there is no objection. No objection can be raised according to the definition of Imam Shafi. أنه شاذ غير مقبول, that it is shadh and it will not be accepted. It is shadh and it is not accepted. So according to Imam Shafi, the definition of shadh is when a reliable narrator narrates a hadith opposing and contradicting what others have narrated. So it is not about singularity. It is about shadh is when mukhalafa takes place. Shadh is not when singularity takes place, when a lone narrator narrates a hadith. So وَأَمَّا قَوْلُ غَيْرِهِ, as for if one was to take the definitions of other scholars, وَأَمَّا قَوْلُ غَيْرِهِ, as for the opinion of others, meaning as for if you were to look into the definitions of other scholars, فَيُشْكَل, then the objection can be raised. فَيُشْكَلُ بِمَا يَنْفَرِدُ بِهِ الْعَدْلُ الْحَافِظُ الضَّابِطُ, then the objection can be raised when the hadith is narrated solely by an adil, full of a person who is full of integrity, and hafiz, and full of retention. He's retentive, he's hafiz and adil, like the hadith of innamal a'malu bin niyat, like the hadith of innamal a'malu bin niyat. So this hadith is narrated solely by Umar from the Prophet ﷺ. ثم تفرد به عن عمر عن علقمة بن وقاص. Then from Umar radiallahu anhu, this hadith has been solely narrated from Umar by Alqama bin Waqas. Then ثم تفرد به عن علقمة محمد بن إبراهيم. Then Muhammad bin Ibrahim, he has solely narrated this hadith from Alqama. ثم عنه يحيى بن سعيد. Then from him Yahya ibn Sa'id. And this hadith, despite it being solely narrated fardan, tafarrudan, mutafarridan, it is not classed as shadh. وحديث النهي عن بيع الولاء وهبته. And the hadith of the prohibition regarding the sale of wala, loyalty, inheritance rights, and its gifting, when the sale of wala and its gifting, the inheritance rights belongs to, this hadith is about the inheritance rights will belong to the person who has freed the slave, not the person selling the slave or gifting the slave. If a slave is being sold and he has wala, the wala will go to the person. The wala will go to the person whom he was freed from. The person whom he was freed from. So the wala, the rights of the inheritance rights belongs solely to the person who has freed the slave. So this hadith is just an explanation of this hadith. So this hadith is تفرد به عبد الله بن دينار. This hadith has been solely reported by Abdullah ibn Dinar from Ibn Umar and Ibn Umar. Then وغير ذلك. Despite that, this hadith is not considered to be shadh. So فكل هذه الأحاديث مخرجة في الصحيحين. All these ahadith, these two and many other hadiths, are documented and they can be found and recorded in the Sahihain. وليس لها إلا إسناد واحد تفرد به ثقة. And it only has one chain. And these hadiths, they only have one chain. وليس لها إلا إسناد واحد. And these hadiths only have one chain, and it has been narrated solely by a ثقة. تفرد به ثقة. So فهذا وشبهه يبين أن الأمر ليس على إطلاق الخليل والحاكم بل على تفصيل نبينه. So this point and the likes of it, this discussion and the likes of this discussion and this point that I have just mentioned and shared, it clarifies that sole narrated hadiths are not considered shadh unconditionally. Sole narrated hadiths are not considered shadh unconditionally and restrictedly, but there is some detail in it. Otherwise, these hadiths, innamal a'malu bin niyat, and the prohibition regarding the sale of wala and its gifting, otherwise they would have been shadh. So sole narrated hadiths are not considered to be shadh unconditionally. So he says, أن الأمر ليس على إطلاق الخليل والحاكم. So the matter is not unconditional. It is not upon the unconditional understanding of Khalili and Hakim's definition. And al-amra, that the definition of shadh, it will not be taken ala al-itlaq unconditionally based on the definition of Khalili and Hakim, but ala tafsil. But in fact, there is some detail which we will clarify. So going back to the text and summarizing what we have just done, he says, Ibn Salah's opinion is, as for that which Imam Shafi deemed shadh, there is no ambiguity. It is not problematic. The definition of Imam Shafi is not problematic. There is no ishkal. No ishkal or objection can be raised according to the definition of Imam Shafi'i. So it is shadh and unacceptable. This is what So أن يروي الثقة حديثا يخالف ما روى الناس. When a reliable narrator narrates a hadith and he opposes and contradicts and disagrees with other people who have narrated. But the definitions of other scholars like Khalili and Hakim, it can become problematic. So when the sole narrator and sole transmitter is upright and trustworthy and precise, like in the case with إنما الأعمال بالنيات and the hadith of Bayl Wala and Hiba. So then he gives an example. He gives two examples. So hadith إنما الأعمال بالنيات stayed solitary it was solitary at every link. It was fardan at every link. Yeah? So every generation it was solely narrated. Umar, then Alqama, then Muhammad ibn Ibrahim, then Yahya, they all narrated this hadith alone. Yeah? So all were precise and all were trustworthy. Yeah? So the chain remained singular throughout. Yet it is amongst the most authentic hadith. It is not shadh, it is amongst the most authentic hadith. Another example is the hadith of Anwala, which was narrated solely by Abdullah ibn Dinar from Ibn Umar. Yeah. So there are many hadiths that are narrated and recorded in the Sahihain, Bukhari and Muslim. So each has a single chain of transmission from a trustworthy narrator, and this can be found. Yeah, a single hadith with a single chain of transmission and from a trustworthy narrator can be found in many of the other works. So the clarification on evaluating the shadh then, what is the best? So this and similar examples clarify that the matter is not to be taken according to the unrestricted and conditional definitions of Imam Khalili and Imam Hakim, but rather it requires detailed explanation, which we present as follows. So we will present this, it is presented in the following way by Imam Nawawi. He says, فنبين فنقول, we say, إن كان من فرد به الراوي مخالفا لما رواه من هو أحفظ منه وأضبط كان مفرده شاذا مردودا. If a rawi solely narrates a hadith, إن كان من فرد به الراوي, if a narrator solely narrates a hadith, مخالفا, contradicting, opposing someone who is more superior in hifz, someone who is more superior in hifz, or someone who is more superior in retention than him, then in this case, kana mufraduhu, this single person's hadith will be considered to be shadh. Kana mufraduhu shadhan, mardudan, and rejected. وَإِن لَمْ يَكُنْ مُخَالِفًا لِغَيْرِهِ, if this sole narrator, if he does not contradict anyone, so فإن كان المنفرد عدلا ضحافظا موثوقا بضبطه قبل مفرده وكان صحيحا. So if this sole person, though he is not contradicting anyone, but he is adil, he is full of integrity, uprightness, he's hafiz, he has a superior hifz, موثوقا بضبطه, he is reliable with his dhabt, with his retention, then his singular sole narration will be accepted, and it will be considered to be sahih, وكان صحيحا. وإن لم يكن موثوقا بضبطه, however, if he is not موثوق بضبط, if he is not reliable with his retention, he is not considered to be ثقة in his retention. لكنه غير بعيد من درجة الحافظ الضابط كان حديثه حسنا. However, he is not also far away from the level of a hafiz. He is not far away from being on the level of a hafiz and dhabit, a person who is full of retention. Then his hadith will be considered to be hasan. وإن كان بعيدا من ذلك, if he is remote and far away from this level, from being hafiz, from reaching the level of hafiz and dhabt, then in that case kana mufraduhu shadhan, his singular narrated hadith will be shadh and munkar, rejected, mardud. So the khulasa is فحصل من هذا. So the khulas and the summary and the hasil and the summary And the gist of this is that أن الشاذ المردود هو المنفرد المخالف, that the shadh, the anomalous report that is considered to be rejected, it is a hadith هو الفرد المخالف. It is when a narrator narrates a hadith singularly, and he contradicts others, al-mukhalif. He contradicts a more reliable narrator. هو الفرد المخالف. When a reliable narrator narrates a hadith, al-mukhalifu, and he contradicts and opposes and disagrees with a more reliable narrator. This is the first. And second, والفرد الذي ليس في راويه من الثقة والضبط ما يجبر تفرده. And the second is when a single sole narrator, the sole والفرد, the singular narrating hadith, الذي ليس في راوي من الثقة, the rawi of this is not on the level, he has not reached the level of thiqa and dhabt, of trustworthiness and dhabt, ما يجبر تفرده, through which its tafarrud can be rectified and justified. So his level of thiqa and dhabt has not reached that level. His level of his daraja of thiqa and dhabt has not reached that level through which one can say that now his tafarrud can be justified or can be rectified. So these are the two types of shadh. Two types of shadh. Wallahu a'lam. So the khulasa is, as mentioned by Shaykh Nurul Itar rahimahullah in the footnote number 2, al-Haqaiq, the verified and researched opinion is أن الأليق في تعريف الشاذ, that the most worthy and competent definition of shadh is the definition of Imam Shafi'i. Imam Shafi'i. What is the definition of Imam Shafi'i? أنه ما رواه الثقة مخالفا لمن هو أوثق منه. The shadh, the anomalous report, is when a trustworthy narrator narrates a hadith opposing and contradicting someone who is more reliable than him. والشاذ من أقسام الضعيف الشديد الضعف. Shadh can be considered to be one of the severe types of the hadith category. ومقابل الشاذ, the opposite of shadh, وهو الراجح, and it is considered to be the preferred report. So shadh is the marjuh, the discredited report, and the rajih, the preferred report. It is called the opposite of shadh is al-mahfuz, the preserved report, the protected and preserved report. So this is the definition of ash-shadh. These two are the best definitions of shadh. So going back to the presentation, so there is detail there is clarification on on evaluating the shadh. So there are 4 ways one can understand shadh. So rules for accepting or rejecting a shadh hadith. So if it contradicts an ahfadh, man huwa ahfaz wa adbat, it contradicts a superior hafiz, a retentive narrator, then in that case the kana mufraduhu shadhan, then this sole person's narrated hadith will be considered to be shadh and rejected. And if it does not contradict a trustworthy narrator, does not contradict, وَإِن لَمْ يَكُنْ مُخَالِفًا لِغَيْرِهِ, but however this munfarid is what? He is adlan, hafidhan, mawthuqan bidhabtihi, then in that case he will be considered to be, the hadith will be considered to be sahih. قُبِلَ مُفْرَدُهُ وَكَانَ صَحِيحًا. If the narrator is nearly reliable, وَإِن لَمْ يَكُنْ مَوْثُوقًا بِضَبْطِهِ لكنه غير بعيد من درجة الحافظ الضابط. He is not موثوق بالضبط. He is not reliable with his ضبط. However, he is not far away too as well from the level and reaching the level of hafiz and ضابط. In that case, كان حديثه حسنا. And if the narrator is far from reliable, وإن كان بعيدا من ذلك كان مفرده شاذا. In that case, if he is far away, then his mufrad, solely reported hadith, will be considered to be shadh and munkar and rejected, mardud. So the khulasa is thus the rejected shadh is these two. هو الفرد المخالف فحصل من هذا أن الشاذ المردود هو الفرد المخالف. A solitary report that contradicts what other more reliable narrators transmitted. This is shadh. And the second is والفرد الذي ليس في راويه من الثقة والضبط. A solitary report in which the narrator does not possess the level of thiqah, the level of reliability and dhabt retention through which it can be compensated for him being alone narrator in this. So through this, to compensate for him being an alone in narrating it. So these are the two definitions of shadh. This is the gist of this 13th category. So the summary of today's lesson is that we discussed the following. We learned the meaning of Tadlis and why it affects hadith reliability. Then we explored the two main forms of Tadlis, Tadlis al-Isnad and Tadlis al-Shuyukh, and also Tadlis al-Taswiyah or Tadlis al-Tajweed from the footnote. We also explored when narrations from a mudallis are accepted or treated as weak. Then we went on to the 13th category. We learned how a shadh narration is identified through contradiction. So this is our end to this week's lesson. Jazakumullah khairan for participating. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the true understanding. If you have any questions, please use the forums. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.